Okay. Barbara laid out the large picture, putting that into closer futures here. As best as we can tell, the world's in a race between implementing ever-increasing ways to improve the human condition. I sometimes observe at the National Academy of Science meetings in Washington, D.C., and during the coffee breaks, theoretically, the top scientists in very specific fields are brought in, and they will say things like, there's no way I can keep track of my field anymore. And these are supposed to be the #1 hotshot folks who are given on the reviews of everything, and they can't keep track of their very narrow specialty anymore. So we've got all these things going on. And the ever-increasing complexity and scale, big word scale, of global problems. Futures research and collective intelligence can help win the race. Now, how are we doing in the race? This is our report card. I won't go through the whole report card. It's in the State of the Future. And we'll put the executive summary online, anybody can get that. But by and large, we're winning the race in general. But some of the areas where we're losing are quite deadly. So we've got to turn those around. But when people say it's all going downhill, that's because they haven't looked at the whole game. We are better educated than before. We are actually killing fewer people than before. We're having fewer wars than before. We're far more peaceful. More strangers are being nice to strangers in airports all around the world than before. We're far more civilized in general than we think. And we all know that that's boring to the press, so you don't hear much about it. But that's the way it is until some other people in the media here can turn that around. We've got far more women in parliaments and governments, saying that women's power is now beginning to come forth. Even in places like Kuwait, we get elected and be in a parliament. We know that as people have more women in the society, in economic and political power, the general welfare goes up, the data is clear, and that's clearly a direction we're going into. The GDP per capita, when people say, the poor getting poorer and all that sort of stuff, you got to look at that very carefully. The current definition of extreme poverty is $1.25 a day. Not only the rate is going down, but the level, while the population of the world is going up, even the level of that is going down. There's still about 185 million people in that case, in that situation. So it's quite high. But the point is, we are winning. And it's important to say that we are winning in certain areas, because if you don't believe we can win, why would you try? If you went back at the end of World War II, when people talked about forming the UN, and people talked about eliminating poverty, people said, you're ridiculous. You'll always have that for this. It's a waste of money. You can't really do this. And we can't even get the audio. No, we can't. But the fact of the matter is, no one today in positions of power thinks it's a waste of time. People in power today, in corporate power, university power, and political power, now argue about what's the best way to do economic development. That's the issue. That's why we got a G20, that's why we got a G8, all that sort of stuff. We are, in fact, winning. It's a massive race to win, but we are winning in a lot of these areas.
Okay, can we drop the one? Yeah, perfect.
Okay. At the bottom of the chart on the right, it says 8,000 pages. Now, we're not asking you to read that. The last person who did, we had to put in a mental hospital. So what I'd like to do, although it has been translated into Spanish, I'm told now, for English and Spanish, 8,000 pages. But so a lot of the stuff I'm referring to has a lot of data behind it. Now, my own take on this evolution that Barbara was talking about in the nearer term, that's why it's 1985, 2000, 2015, 2030, is that we domesticated primates, to take the phrase from Timothy Leary, are merging with, not the computer, there we go, merging with technology. The term cyborg really means humans dependent on a vital life function for technology. So if I put glasses on, get in the car and drive, I am a temporary cyborg. Now, of course, that doesn't mean we got to be the Borgs are us business in Brave New Worlds and that sort of images in Star Trek. But part of the idea of science fiction is to warn us about things. The idea of being dependent upon technology is just the way it is. And the better we merge with biology, our minds, and technology, the better off we're going to be. We cannot solve those big global problems without very precise, intelligent technology. And we're moving. That's the trend. I had those years ago when out there. I used to actually keep track of patents years ago. I was working on another book. And it kept going up, so I just gave up.
That's the trend. I don't care what anybody says. We are becoming cyborgs. You don't like the term cyborg, you can change it, but human-machine interface or technology is a merger system. The better we make that merger with Mystic on one side and Technocrat on the other side, the better off we're going to be. On the other side of the house is the built environment. We're offloading our mind, our consciousness, our values, our aesthetics, or that into our physical environment. You'll be able to take your coat off, throw it on the bed, and then it says, hey, clean me. Nanotechnology sensors are going to be into all kinds of things so that you have your ubiquitous computing in all kinds of areas. It'll talk to you, it recognizes you and all that. So the whole environment seems to become alive. So our built environment becomes, in a sense, conscious. These two will eventually merge, it seems to me, if I can get the computer to work here, when the distinction between these two trends become blurred, where you can't make a distinction anymore. In the same way, when we had the early computer communications, you had a computer and you had a telephone, right? You put them together, you had computer communications. You could make a distinction between these two things, but you couldn't separate them and have email. Right? In that same sense, the consciousness technology will be that fully, in my judgment, integrated. And the term I'm using for the time being is conscious technology. I didn't have a hyphen in the past because a friend of mine talked me out of it as being too complex, and I think I made a mistake. We accepted the idea of space-time, but conscious technology, which doesn't mean technologies of consciousness. It means the full integration of the built environment, the technology of the human mind as a continuum. And you can't quite tell where one starts and one leaves off. If I call you on a telephone, am I talking to you or a machine? All of us say, well, you're talking to me. No, I'm not. I'm talking to a machine which talks to a machine, which talks to a machine, which talks to a machine, which talks to you. Actually, talk to some bones in your head. They're not a part of a biological machine. Anyway, we have audio space that we live in. So imagine written that large for the whole human species.
To the old mystic idea, the great oneness, and so forth. And of course, the Macintosh fans in the world say, "Want to make it work for you." Hi, friend. Okay, now because I'm a quasi-futurist, I have to divide up the world into little boxes. So the first three boxes most futurists will agree with: the agricultural age, the industrial age, the information age. I put little one-words in here to make it easy for folks. So we got an evolution of agricultural age, an extraction age, and then the power was controlled by religion, which is still the case in a lot of the oil places in the world today, which are still extraction places. Wealth controlled by land, the place was Earth's resources, and war was fought over location. That's why they had castles. And time was cyclical, nothing changed under the sun. And then you can sort of like take these things down. Industrial, we get a machine, nation state, wealth moves to capital, to factories, wars fought over resources, and time becomes linear. And you can have linear production systems. Information systems, where we're moving into now, the product becomes information services, power moves to the corporation, wealth is determined by access, the place is the office, wars are fought over perception, and time is flexible, flexi here, flexi there, and so forth. The transition then goes next to linkage. When I say linkage is a product, imagine your socks have biological sensors that your insurance company gives you so that you can reduce your premium, and the airlines make a deal with the insurance company so you don't die in a heart attack on an airplane. So you go to the airport, it says, "I'm sorry, you got to take 2 aspirin before we give you a boarding pass." So the idea is that you can link socks with boarding passes, what else can be done? So there's a lot of what will be created. Power moves the individual. Wealth is a being. It's the old philosophical idea that the wealthy human beings are. Well, now it actually becomes real, because if you have the access, you got the capital, you got the land, you got all this sort of capability. What's interesting is you. And if you're boring, you are poor. The war goes to identity. Don't want to talk too much about that. And time becomes an invention, because if we live in many spaces, we can also live in past spaces. We can live in fantasy spaces. We can live in, athletic workout spaces. We can live in so many worlds simultaneously with the technologies we're able to do. What time is it? Time is a measure of motion. So we're simplifying. So if you're going to change the different motions, you have different senses of time.